Hello, my name is Diane, and this week I decided I'm going to read an entire series, almost an entire series. So one author whose name I see around a lot, see a few of her titles, but don't really know anything about is Seanan McGuire. I often see that I don't know what it's called or anything about it, the book with the hand on the cover and it's like a wax hand or something. I think there's another book with a similar style cover, and then she has a series and there's a doorway on each cover. And that's all I know about her. I see her around a lot, hear the name a lot, see those covers, but I don't feel like I've ever heard what any of them are really about or anything more detailed than they're good. So this week I want to solve that mystery, see what it's all about, see if maybe Seanan McGuire is for me. I really don't know. So the series I'm going to read is called Wayward Children. All I really know about it is it's children who have gone through to Portal Fantasy worlds, like Alice through the Looking Glass, and then they return to their own worlds, but they are constantly longing to go back to that Portal Fantasy world wherever it was they went. They just want to get back to that magical world and out of their real mundane lives. I'm not really sure if it's going to be following characters that already exist in fiction or if we're going to get entirely new characters and worlds, if we're ever going to get to see these worlds, or if it's just in the real world following these characters. The first book is Every Heart a Doorway, and that's pretty much all I know about the books or the series as a whole. So let's find out what it's all about. So I finished Every Heart a Doorway, and it was fine. I liked it. I liked the concept of it more than I liked the execution. So basically, Every Heart a Doorway is about this girl named Nancy, who is a teenage girl, and she's gone into this portal world of the Hall of the Dead. And in her perspective, she was gone for years. From the real world's perspective, she was gone for months, I think like 6 months. And then she was sent back to the real world and told she can come back once she's sure she wants to stay at the Hall of the Dead. And of course her friends and family all think that she's crazy. They think she was kidnapped and is traumatized or whatever. So they send her to this boarding school to help her cope with whatever actually happened to her and hopefully come back to them as her old self, as they knew her before she ever left. So we meet Nancy when she arrives at the school. She doesn't really understand anything about any of the other worlds that the other people at the school have been to. They use all these terms that she's not familiar with, the way they refer to where they've been and the types of places you could go. And then shortly after Nancy arrives, there is a murder at the school and nobody really knows what happened or who's behind it, but it seems very suspicious to everyone else that this girl shows up from somewhere within the land of the dead, and then people start dying when she's in their school. So I think this book had a lot of interesting concepts. There's a lot of cool ideas of all these characters once they come back to the real world, how they're dealing with what they've experienced, how other people are perceiving what they've experienced. But it felt like we kept getting details about things within this world, other people outside of the main cast of characters, and they were there to kind of paint a picture of this world and all of the things in it, but it felt like we were just getting details about unrelated things and not enough details or explanations about what was actually going on within the story. And then we would keep getting interesting things about those characters, but then not really talking about them very much or at all. They were just kind of sprinkled in and then we'd move on to something else. So I think it was a lot of cool ideas, but it didn't have very much depth in the story. It was just kind of felt like all style and no substance, which is a little disappointing. I don't think it was bad. I think it was still an interesting story, an interesting world, but I definitely didn't love it. But I am going to continue on with the second book, Down Among the Sticks and Bones, I think. So I'll be back when I finish that one. So I'm having a little lunch break between books, but I finished the second book. I finished, what is it called? Down Among the Sticks and Bones. And I have a lot of feelings. I have a lot of thoughts. And I don't know if I'm liking this series. So the second book follows these identical twin sisters called Jack and Jill. They're characters from the first book, except now we're going back to seeing how they grew up, their life before they went into a magical world, how they discovered their portal world, and what happened to them while they were there. That's what I wanted from the first book, was a little bit more about what these girls had experienced and kind of what went on in the portal worlds. It's all kind of glossed over a bit in the first book. And now we actually get to go through that whole experience with them. My problem with it, though, is there's so many heavier topics just kind of casually thrown in and not addressed in a way that I feel okay with. I don't know. They're like supposed to be learning how to cope with things, but a lot of the things that are tying them to their magical worlds and what they love about them and the way they're behaving in them feels like they're trying to cope with something. It's kind of related to something that is going on in their real life, particularly with these characters. It might be different for other characters, but with these girls in particular, I felt like the way they grew up was they were a bit repressed in who they were as people, and then they go to this world and it feels like they're really leaning into that very heavily, those feelings. So just seeing them go through these really bizarre experiences and then just desperately want to be in them forever feels very strange. Yeah, I didn't love that one. Book 2. I think I liked the first book more. As much as I wanted to see their specific experiences, I don't think I liked that specific experience. So I'm gonna have my lunch and then book 3. So I finished the third book, Beneath the Sugar Sky. It starts out at that boarding school, and then a character appears out of one of these magical worlds, appears at the school, and we find out that she's the daughter of one of the characters from the main book. The character who dies in the first book somehow had a daughter who was in the magical world that she was in, and she's come back because now she needs to find her mother. Seeing like both sides of it and how it ties into things that have already happened, I still feel like I'm just not really connecting with the writing style. I think that's the main thing that's keeping me from being really engaged with these. It's like a nonsense, magical, ridiculous world. But something about the way it's written feels like it's described too directly. Like some of the conversations that are happening feel very crude in an unnecessary way, which is something that generally bothers me in writing. And some of the magical things they're like cool and interesting, but they're not captivating. I don't think it's going to be very memorable for me. I'm not loving this, but I'm not hating it, or I would stop. I'm probably going to start the fourth book tonight. I don't know if I'll finish it tonight. I'll probably finish these tomorrow. I am only going to read 7 of the books. The 8th one just came out this year. I have no idea what the next one's going to be, so I'll see you after I finish that. Good morning. Last night I finished In an Absent Dream. I did like the fourth book. I still don't love the writing. I still don't think it was a super gripping story, but I think this one felt the most focused. This is another prequel following a character that we meet in the first book, Every Hearted Doorway. And in the first book, we learn that she looks a lot younger than she actually is, and she explains why that's the case. So we kind of already know how her story is going to end, but we get to, again, meet the character in her ordinary life, in her family life, and then see her discover this magical land, go to it, and this one, it's the Goblin Market. But she ends up going back to her family with the expectation that she's going to go back to the Goblin Market in a year's time. So we kind of go on that journey with her. We do get to know her family and one of her sisters in particular. And I thought the Goblin Market itself was really interesting, but that's also kind of a familiar setting. Yeah, a lot of the main theme that we're supposed to be like getting out of it felt a little over-explained. At this point, I wouldn't say I'm loving the series as a whole. I do think it's getting better as we go. I think this one helped that we were mostly following one character in her journey, whereas the third book we're kind of following two characters, and then the first and the second we're really following one character, but it felt like we were trying to follow a small group of characters through the eyes of one character, and this one was just one character. We're following her journey through her eyes, and I think that worked better with this writing. And also I just think it was a more interesting setup personally. So I have 3 more that I'm thinking I'll be able to finish today. Yesterday I finished Come Tumbling Down, Across the Green Grass Fields, and Where the Drowned Girls Go, books 5, 6, and 7. So Come Tumbling Down follows the twins Jack and Jill again. They were in the first book. They were the feature of the second book. That was their prequel story. And then they come back for the 5th book. And books 1, 3, and 5 are all chronological. You don't really have to read any of these books in order to understand what's going on, which is kind of nice. You can pick and choose which story you want, but those 3 seem to follow the same story timeline. It was fine. It was fine. Across the Green Grass Fields gives us a new character, and we go on basically the backstory of this newer character and her experience going into a magical world and then coming back. And then book 7 is that same character who is now in the boarding home, the home for wayward children, takes in the children who want to go back to their fantasy world and decides to go to the sister school where the children who come back and just want to forget everything that happened there. They're ready to be back in the real world, be back in their real lives, and move on. So overall, as a series, it was just okay for me. I didn't love any of them. Some of them I think were better than others. I liked In an Absent Dream and Where the Drowned Girls Go. On a whole, what I really liked about it is the concept of these children who go into portal fantasy worlds. They all had some significant thing that was impacting them that made them want this door to open up, and when the door did open up and they went through it, made that place feel like a better place to be. Even though in a lot of these cases, those places weren't good, happy, magical places. I wish we had gotten a little bit more of character growth to really dive into what made the bad things in the fantasy world better or good, and the things in the real world we kind of get a sense of why they're not desirable. I feel like that's something that we just kind of dance around and is never shown in the character's arc why this is where they want to be, other than it felt like home. But at the same time, one of my problems with it was that these did feel like they should have been young adult stories. Young characters coming to terms with the things that they've dealt with in their real life and desiring something different, whatever that may be, whatever magical world they went to. And then just some out of place, crude things that were added in. And it felt like they were just there for shock value that made it adult rather than young adult. So I think it should have either just pull out those unnecessary mature things that were thrown in and let it be young adult, or lean more into the darker things, because we do kind of gloss over a lot of the things that happen in these books. And one of my biggest problems with it was that the characters all felt very flat. They were all very one-dimensional. They all had one trait about them that was their defining feature. In the first book, our main character Nancy felt like I don't know anything about her. She doesn't really stick out as a character with a personality. She's just an orderly person who likes stillness. And that is just a reflection of the fantasy world she went to. And I don't feel like I ever understood why that was a thing she wanted, other than to get approval. But then there's that disconnect of why does she want approval in the fantasy world and not approval in the real world where she came from. I think if this sounds like an interesting concept to you, I would recommend at least giving it a try. And if you don't like the writing style, you're probably not going to like most of the series. But if the writing style does work for you, or if it's something you can look past because you enjoy the world enough, there's 8 books out. There are a few short stories in between, and I'm pretty sure there are more books coming in this series. The series has won a lot of awards. The first book has won multiple awards. The series as a whole has won an award. A few of the sequels within the series have won awards on their own, or at least been a nominee for an award. I'm not planning on reading anything else from this series. I'm probably not going to read anything else from Seanan McGuire. I think 7 is enough to confidently say that this author is not for me. If you've read this series, I'd love to hear what you think about it. If you agree with me, if you disagree with me, either way, I think it's interesting to talk about. That's all for me today. Thanks for hanging out with me. I'll see you next time. Bye.